if you could describe your management style in one word, you would say it's supportive. And I thought that was really quite unique. When did you decide that that was going to be your style? And how does it look in reality?
Well, so I would say I definitely am a supportive CEO, but there are other things too. Probably I'd like to add visionary too, because I do think, especially in tech, it's important to be one step ahead and have an understanding of what the future is and how you get the company there. So I'd like to say I'm like very supportive in helping the company get to what's the right future. And of course, there are hard decisions. I mean, there are times where you make a hard decision and that has to be it. Like you got to make it. And if you don't, the company will suffer. So you have to be willing to make those hard decisions. But one of the reasons I said supportive at the time, and I do believe that's an important part of running a company, is that for me, it's really important to understand what's actually going on in the company. And it's possible as CEO that everybody tells you how good everything is, that that their product is great, it's getting lots of views, it's doing all the right things, they have the right roadmap, and there are a lot of problems. And they're not necessarily going to tell you what the problems are. And so as a CEO, you need to figure out what they are. And if you are a scary person that everyone is really worried about, they're a lot less likely to tell you about what the problems are. And so I really wanted to take an approach where people are open with me, that they understand that we can talk about what's going well, but also what's not going well, and that I will work with them to fix it. And there are a lot of things that don't go well. I acknowledge that. And I want to actually talk with my teams about what's not going well. Where are the problems? And how do we get to a plan to fix it? Because if you don't get that plan, if you don't acknowledge it, and then it's never going to get fixed.
Susan Wojicki was a titan in technology, entertainment, advertising, and she was a mom of 5. She was best known for renting her garage to her friends, the founders of Google, where she became the 16th employee and eventually served as CEO of YouTube. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2024 after a 2-year battle with cancer. Northhouse explains that leadership is a process involving influence, occurring in groups to achieve shared goals. I'm Francis Roberts, and as a former Google and YouTube employee and one of Susan's biggest fans, I'm excited to explore her leadership through this frame. I will start by giving you a little bit of background information about Susan, then we'll examine her leadership through 3 lenses: the 5F frameworks, mechanisms, and outcomes. So I first met Susan in 2017, shortly after I started working at YouTube. I had already spent 5 years working at Google as a data analyst on a sales team, and just weeks before meeting her, I moved over to YouTube to work as a creator partner manager, helping manage some of the greatest and biggest creators on the platform. I was standing in the back of the room during one of YouTube's infamous creator summits, where the top creators from around the world come together to build community, learn about YouTube features and strategy, and hear from leadership. And I saw Susan, so I went over to introduce myself. We chatted a little bit, and I told her that I had just started at YouTube and I came over from Google. And she said, "Oh, I used to work at Google too. I came over to YouTube about 3 years ago. It's a really cool path, and we see a lot of Googlers who come over to YouTube. They really find success." Her response has stuck with me since that day. Susan didn't just used to work at Google. She was foundational in how we experience Google today. And she was the visionary responsible for Google's purchase of YouTube in 2006. So let's get into a little bit about her background. She was born in 1968 in Santa Clara, California, to an educator and a journalist and a physics professor at Stanford. So she actually grew up on the campus of Stanford. She went on to get her bachelor's in history and literature from Harvard in 1990, then her master in economics from UC Santa Cruz, and her MBA from UCLA. Early in her career, Susan was a management consultant and worked in marketing at Intel. Eventually, she joined Google and basically changed the world as we know it.
I joined Google during the height of the first .com boom in the late 1990s. Now, I know this seems like ancient time to you guys, but it really was not that long ago. At the time, I was newly married, and my husband and I decided to buy a house, which was a huge decision. We could barely afford the mortgage, so we decided we would rent part of our house and the garage. Thanks to a mutual friend, we rented our garage to 2 graduate students at Stanford who had just started a company and were looking for office space. They seemed nice. Their ideas sounded kind of crazy. Back then, no one had heard of Larry Page and Sergey Brin or the new company with the funny name. Google? What? What does that mean? It doesn't really matter. As long as you guys pay the rent on time, you guys can build your googly thing here. Once they moved in, we had late nights together in the garage eating pizza and M&Ms, where they talked to me about how their technology could change the world. But then they would go on equally excited about the fact that my house had a washer and dryer. They made bold proclamations. We're gonna organize the entire World Wide Web, followed by, which day is recycling day? And when I asked them how much experience they had to back this ambitious plan, they would say, well, our combined age is almost 50. And they were entering a competitive area. There were many well-funded search engines, famous at the time, although you've probably never heard of them. Alta Vista, Lycos, Excite. Can you imagine if you wanted to search for something online and you had to say, I'm gonna Alta Vista, the answer? That would be kind of awkward. Or let's go Excite that. You guys should be grateful to Larry and Sergey for the name alone. So I was working at Intel at the time, and I think I can say this now. I thought they were crazy. But then one day, something funny happened at work. I opened up my browser to look something up, and it turned out that Google was down. There was an error page. And I sat there and I couldn't get my work done because I realized that no other search service could find the information. I had become dependent on Google for doing my day-to-day work. And then it hit me, if Google had become so indispensable to me, then maybe the vision that Larry and Sergey had wasn't so crazy. Maybe there were people all over the world sitting at their computers, upset right now because they couldn't get what they needed done because the site developed by those two dudes in my garage was down. It turns out that finding information matters. It matters a lot to a lot of people. And accessing that information could instantly empower people across the globe. I decided I wanted to work for Google, which at the time also was crazy. With a mortgage to pay, student loans, I'd have to leave a comfortable job at a Fortune 500 company and work for the guys who lived in my garage at a startup with no revenue, a handful of male employees, and also, did I mention I was pregnant? Now people thought I was a crazy one. So looking back on this, I've learned that life doesn't always present you with the perfect opportunity at the perfect time. Opportunities come when you least expect them, or when you're not ready for them. Rarely are opportunities presented to you in the perfect way, in a nice little box.
In 1999, Susan joined Google as employee number 16, although she frequently pointed out that if she had just joined a day before, she would have been employee number 12. She was the first marketing manager where she was tasked with creating a worldwide brand, infamously with no budget. And she was the company's only marketing employee.
So I was responsible for Google's marketing. As I mentioned, I had very little experience. I was hired the only person in marketing for a startup, and I was asked to create a worldwide brand called Google that with zero budget. So nobody in their right mind would ever sign up for such a crazy job. And I just didn't know any better, which is why I signed up for it. And, but I realized really early on that to be able to get people to use Google, and the best way to do that was to try to influence a product. And so I became more into product management, creating the product. And
in this role, she helped create the iconic Google logo and Google Doodles. Eventually, she moved to product management, where she created Google Image Search and Google Books. And in that product management role, she was critical in growing Google's advertising and analytics ecosystem. She was the product manager for AdWords, which was Google's original online advertising platform that let businesses create text or display ads that appeared next to search results or on partner websites. She helped pioneer the targeted, measurable, auction-based ad model that has led to Google being worth $3 trillion, and she changed the entire global digital marketing landscape. She eventually added more responsibility to her remit, including helping develop AdSense, which allows website owners and creators to earn money by displaying ads on their websites, Google Analytics, a free data tracking tool that shows how people find and use certain websites, and she helped oversee the 2007 acquisition and integration of DoubleClick, which was an ad tech company that provides tools for ad serving, targeting, and measurement across websites. Together, all these products have formed the backbones of Google's massive advertising business. And let's be clear, if her career had just stopped there, Susan's legacy would have been cemented. But in 2005, Susan added Google Video to her scope, in addition to ads, as the Senior Vice President of Advertising and Commerce. While working on Google Video, she became an early advocate for user-generated video. After seeing a video of two college students lip-syncing to the Backstreet Boys' "I Want It That Way" and the accompanying metrics, she advocated for Google to buy YouTube for $1.65 billion in 2006. At the time, this was the company's largest acquisition ever. And while today it may seem that purchasing Google was a no-brainer, that was certainly not the case.
I was just always willing to say more controversial things. Like I would just say, like, this is my point of view. Like I'm working for our users, our creators, and our advertisers. And if I think something is the right thing to do, like I'll just say that. And it might not be the popular point of view, but like, that's okay.
You suggested buying YouTube, right? Didn't you put together a whole presentation?
Yeah, I suggested buying YouTube. It wasn't necessarily a popular point of view. Somebody published, Mark Cuban actually, the week beforehand said only a moron would buy YouTube. So I mean,
you bought it.
I think it's really important to be able to take to think for yourself and realize like what's important, what matters to my constituents, like who am I working for? Why am I working? Why am I doing all this? And so I have really focused on trying to do something productive and good for the world. My whole career has been about information empowerment, and that's what has led me to where I am right now. And it just happened to be that I was in the C-suite.
After the acquisition, Susan continued to run Google's ads and commerce business. And in 2014, she became the CEO of YouTube, the company that she advocated for purchasing only 8 years prior. Now, let's analyze Susan's leadership as it relates to the 5F's frameworks, which helps us understand what makes an effective leader. We will look at leadership features, functions, forms, fit, and focus. Let's start with features. As Northhouse outlines, leadership features focus on the characteristics or traits of people who lead. When we think about traits, we think about distinctive characteristics, qualities, or attributes that describe a person. They are inherent and relatively unchanging over time. Susan was actually asked what trait she thinks makes a good leader, and this was how she answered.
What personality traits do you think a good leader should have?
A good leader needs vision, needs to be willing to work hard, needs to be willing to listen. That's, I think, one point of view that people probably don't think about is you need to be able to hear what people say. People need to feel heard by you. And you need to be able to express and represent what's happening in the company to the outside world and the outside world to the company. And be willing to go with the ups and downs. It's not always easy, and it's not always clear where you're going, and be able to think critically and have a vision and a thought and be committed to getting there.
When I think about Susan's leadership features, cognitive ability, resilience, insight, emotional stability, problem solving, adjustment, and drive all come to mind. But for the sake of brevity, let's just focus on insight. In leadership, insight is a deep, intuitive understanding of a situation, which includes both internal and external perspectives. Susan really talks about the power of insights and how she used them in business, including leaving her comfortable job at Intel while pregnant to work at Google, and her push to purchase YouTube.
coming in as such an early employee of Google, and then also being the one that really encouraged Google to purchase YouTube, to me that speaks of your vision as a leader and being able to kind of see 10 steps down, like this is where we need to go, or this company is going to make it. What was it in those two different instances, like with making a decision to join Google as a brand new company and also later, saying we need to purchase YouTube? What did you see in those two opportunities, or how do you figure out like where you should go next as a business leader? What was so compelling about those two decisions that were so pivotal in your career and with these companies?
Yeah. There were two really important decisions, and I think they were, joining Google for me was definitely a leap. It was a small company. I mean, people now say, of course Google. At the time, there were lots of search engines. People said there's no money in search. And why does the world need another search engine? And there was Google had zero revenue, no salespeople. Or actually, we had just hired our first salesperson. That was in the 4 people who started before me. And but what I saw is I just saw having grown up again on the college campus, I saw this is something that's providing information for people in a better way. And that was really motivating to me. And so I wasn't focused on the revenue. I was just focused on, is this going to make a difference in people's lives? And if the answer is yes, and I thought, wow, it could make a difference not just in my life, but in everyone's life. This is a much better tool than anyone else has, and much better technology. And it was a risk. I did join Google pregnant. I actually joined 4 months pregnant, and I left Intel, and which is a great company, but it was just a lot of people were even more confused when I told them that I was leaving Intel and I was pregnant, and it was a great choice because of just the opportunity. I think on the YouTube acquisition, again, it had to do with the fact that I just saw that YouTube was providing video and making it available to people in the world that otherwise wouldn't have been available. And so it was actually I call them these insights, there are moments where you see something, but the world hasn't seen it yet. That you understand the way the world is going to change in the future, and everyone else thinks you're crazy. They don't believe you yet, but in your heart, because you are seeing something that most people don't have the opportunity to see, that the world is going to change as a result. And that's what happened to me with YouTube. I saw these videos, I saw that people wanted to watch them, and I saw the numbers, and I knew that there was something in having regular people all over the world creating videos, and that other people would want to watch it. And most people didn't think that was true. But I think the numbers speak for themselves. So we just announced that we have 1 billion hours being viewed every single day on YouTube.
Functions. Leadership functions focus on the actions and interactions of people who lead, also known as leadership behaviors. There are a number of theories associated with leadership behaviors, and I believe Susan embodies many of them, including servant leadership, authentic leadership, and transformational leadership. In an effort to make sure that this video isn't 500 hours long, I want to focus specifically around transformational leadership. According to Northhouse, transformational leadership includes the 4 I dimensions. Those are idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. Ideal influence focuses on communicating a vision and having high moral standards. Susan was absolutely a visionary leader, and she frequently talked about how having a vision is the most important thing for a leader. We also see evidence of this with her YouTube creator letters and videos where she communicated the YouTube vision to the creators, which she deemed the lifeblood of the ecosystem.
Like in sort of my YouTube example, the idea, or even like in Google, you have to look at sort of these big trends. Where are things going? Like, are more people, going online? Are more people able to, going to create video? So you have to understand these overall trends. But and then you have to work out the details. So, there's understanding that your trends are right and having that vision of where you want it to go, what you want your product to look like. It's very helpful a lot of times to think about what you want something to look like 2 years from now when you're finished. And then like working backwards of like, well, what's the most basic thing I can do to actually get it out of the door? And then we'll layer on all these other things down the road, but this is like the basic version that we can come out with now. But if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there, and you might actually build the wrong first version. And so it's very important to understand where you're going and how those market trends are intersecting, and then you can usually navigate the rest of the issues.
Her sisters also talked about her family history and how that helped shape her moral compass.
Interesting though, both of my dad's parents, his father was a judge, actually in pre-war Polish government, and then, actually was in exile in London during the war. And so when you asked a little bit about Susan, I think about Susan's moral compass, and even Anne's, the ethics, the commitment to, social justice. I think growing up, there was nothing more honorable and nothing that could, trump actually doing good in the world, right? And making a difference for people, whether it be through science or art or, law. It just was something that would actually improve the world, was actually the best possible thing that you could do as a human being.
Next, let's move on to inspirational motivation. That is centered around communicating high expectations, using emotional appeal and symbols to focus groups and to achieve more. Susan frequently talked about how she was very tolerant of employees trying different things, but at the same time, she expected greatness.
So is there a culture of tolerance for experimentation at Google, and what happens when you fail?
Well, so we've definitely encouraged innovation. We've encouraged like building and trying lots of new things, and I think we've certainly learned. I'll just use like the AdWords example that we had a vision early on. We had the vision that the advertising would be targeted, that it would be relevant to the actual query. Those were sort of the fundamental trends, and we thought like and it should be easy to sign up. So we had those as basic trends, but then we tried our first version and like nobody clicked on it, and so we're like, well, we should probably change the format. So then we changed the format. Our first version was sold in a different way. It was priced in a different way, and so those are all improvements that we made, and we're still making those improvements. But it takes many versions to usually get to the right thing.
You're very tolerant of this incrementalism, so it doesn't have to be perfect out of the box.
Yeah, we try to do great things, and sometimes doing great things means like understanding where you're going and not just doing like incremental things. But we're tolerant of trying lots of different things and trying to understand. I think if you know where you're going, you can come up with different iterations to try to figure out how to get there.
Now let's move on and talk about intellectual stimulation, which concerns stimulating followers to be creative and innovative, supporting them, and letting people figure things out on their own. Susan spoke frequently about how her job as a leader is to hire the right people, set them up for success, and give them the right resources.
Well, I think the first and most important thing is scale. And a lot about scaling is getting the right people in place and figuring out who do you need in place to be able to get it done. Because you learn really quickly, I'm sure as everyone here in the audience knows, that you're only as good as your team is, and your job is to really hire the experts and to set them up and give them the right direction and the right resources to make that happen. And so, and also to set the right priorities. And so that's also been a big challenge, which is how YouTube, I think, is similar to Google, which is, if there are 50 things you want to do and you only have enough resources for 10, you don't want to peanut butter your team. You want to make some hard choices and say, these are the things that we're going to do. These are the things we're going to do really, really well. And then do them well and hire the right people. Give them the resources, give them the funding to make that happen.
Finally, when we think about individualized consideration, it's really about providing a supportive climate and listening to individual needs. Susan spoke about this and emphasized the importance of getting to know the people that you lead.
I was really lucky. I was able to work with this person named Bill Campbell. And if you look up like the coach of Silicon Valley, you'll read about Bill Campbell. And he was I was fortunate to work with him for many years. He also was a coach to Larry Page and Sergey Brin and the Google management team, and also Steve Jobs. They were very close, and he would always say it's all about the people. That was one of his big lines, is that you really have to get to know the people. And he would talk about, when you have your one-on-ones, you need to take them really seriously, and you need to get to know the people first, and you need to know what's going on, what makes them tick, how to support them. And he cared. He really cared.
Okay, now let's move on to the third F, form. When we talk about leadership form, it really speaks about the patterns of sharing, distributing, or rotating leadership. Generally speaking, when we think about this, there is hierarchical leadership, which is focused on chain of command, and there's hierarchical leadership, which is focused on shared leadership. I believe Susan embodied a bit of a hybrid form of leadership, with a particular emphasis on listening and leaning on experts. And I observed this hybrid model firsthand while I worked at YouTube. So let's talk about the organizational structure. At YouTube, there are three main teams. There's the business team, there's the product team, and there's the engineering team. And while at YouTube, the leaders of all those respective orgs were named Robert, Neil, and Scott. Susan was the CEO, and collectively, they referred to themselves as RNSS. And they really embodied what shared leadership was about, with each of them taking on different roles and challenges in the business. At the same time, Susan was very clear that she was the CEO, and it was important for her to make final decisions and then for the organization to move forward. She was also CEO of YouTube, which is a part of the broader company known as Alphabet, which contains Google. And so technically, while she was CEO, she also reported to the CEO of Alphabet. So this is another example of shared leadership, where she owns one part of the business, but also, works with other parts of the business. And I think this is what reflects what Contractor refers to as collective leadership. And when we think about this hierarchical leadership, I actually found evidence that style was actually fostered in her household growing up.
What did your parents feed you, three, that made you all so successful? When you think about how you were raised, and I know your mom wrote a whole book about this, but Anne, what do you think the secret sauce was?
I think there's a couple elements. I think that, I think one of the, my mom will talk about independence, which we definitely had a lot of independence. And I think my mom did always have that. She always treated us like we had a real voice. Even when I was little, I was given that authority to argue with her, or both my parents, and to, negotiate ideas. And, I never felt like I had rules. Like there was never, a top-down approach of like, you must follow X, Y, or Z. There was always
Because I said so.
Right. It was never I said so. I remember being very bewildered as a child once, where a friend said like, oh, well, my parents just said that. I'm like, well, can't you negotiate? And they're like, no, that doesn't work. And like the way we were raised, like there was always the ability to negotiate. And I think that we did grow up in a family that was very academic, that appreciated debate. And my mom and my dad always looked at like, the world is meant to change. So you should envision the future, and then you fight for that. Like you advocate. And so
now let's dive into the fourth F, which is leadership fit, which talks about the match between leadership traits and behaviors and the situational and contextual demands of the business, as explained by OC. Watkins Starr's framework, which talks about startups, turnaround, accelerated growth, realignment, and sustaining success, really talks about the prototypical leadership situations, especially when transitioning into new roles. At different parts of her career, Susan operated in different situations. When she first got to Google, as employee number 16, it was very much a startup. She frequently reminded people that it was not a foregone conclusion that Google was going to be successful. There were many search engines out there at the time, and Google actually had $0 of revenue. So in this startup framework, it required her to build strategy, structures, and systems from scratch, but it also gave her the opportunity to formulate a high-performing team. Due to much of the work that she did, Google eventually moved into an accelerated growth phase that required her to create systems to help the company scale, one of the most important things for a successful tech company. Eventually, when Susan moved over to YouTube, she went back to that startup situation, as she noted here.
So I was at I've been at Google for 17 years, and I joined it when it was really tiny. 3 years ago, I moved over to YouTube. And when I came to YouTube, I really felt like I was almost going back in time, because I saw that it was a smaller company, but it was also on the edge of this really big change. And that really big change is users changing the way that they view video. And so TV is probably one of the biggest markets, from ad, from subscription, from time spent. And if you look at the next generation, they are completely changing the way that they watch TV. They don't watch the TV as we knew it. They watch Grace and all of Grace Contemporary on their mobile phones, in their bedroom probably. And it's completely different. And so I saw that opportunity with YouTube, and I think we're still at the beginning of it. And so I'm really excited to be leading YouTube when we make that transition.
Eventually, YouTube would face a number of challenges and crises, moving the company more into a realignment phase. Starting in March 2017, there were a string of events related to brand safety. There were advertiser boycotts, concerns around child safety and content moderation, radicalization, and the COVID-19 content crisis. These issues were very serious, and I was there in April 2016 when a disgruntled creator entered YouTube headquarters and opened fire on employees, wounding 3 people and then taking her own life, which was very serious. I believe these issues highlight the importance of balancing conflicting stakeholder needs. So in the case of YouTube, creators wanted freedom and revenue, advertisers wanted brand safety, and user wants content that is relevant and appropriate. I believe that Susan was the right fit for the job at the time because her infamously calm leadership was on full display as she navigated the company through a seemingly unlimited number of crises and scandal. And finally, that brings us to focus. Leadership focus refers to the strategic focal point of leadership as being internal or external. Susan's leadership was both. Initially, she was very internally focused, working with teams at Google to create great products that would elevate the Google brand and to help the company become a global, worldwide brand. At YouTube, she was initially internally focused, thinking about how to grow the platform exponentially. As YouTube started to face crises and criticism, she shifted to a more external focus, communicating to the world that the goal of YouTube was to give everyone a voice, even though it was a hard task that didn't necessarily happen in a nice and neat way. She was often challenged about the decisions that YouTube made, and instead of running away from these hard decisions, she showed up and was an ambassador for YouTube, communicating the purpose and vision of the platform, even when it was hard. And we can see this exemplified in this contentious interview here.
I think you can be in a much better place. And
so you get better, but can you get it to the point where we're not seeing a story about something awful happening within YouTube on a sort of weekly basis? Can you get it where this thing is an exception to the rule?
I mean, I think there's always going to be, at the scale that we're at, there are always going to be people who want to write stories. Well,
there's also people who want to put terrible things on your website, right? You guys talk about the fact that you took down 8 million terrible pieces of content in the last quarter, right? And you're proud of that because you were able to, 75% of it no human ever saw. If I ran a business for people dumping that much sludge onto my property on a quarterly basis, I would really rethink what I'm doing. And it seems like, I just can't fathom why there's 8 million pieces of terrible things coming onto your site on a quarterly basis, but that would really upset me and worry me.
Well, it matters what's the denominator. Like you gave the numerator, right? And so, we have a large denominator, meaning we have like lots of content who's uploaded and lots of users and lots of really good content. And, when we look at it, what all the news and the concerns and the stories have been about this fractional 1%. So if you talk about the other 99 point, whatever that number is, like that's all really valuable content of people who are sharing valuable points of view that we haven't heard about, educational content, addressing really important issues. And so I think it's important to remember that and put that in perspective. And I say that not because we are not committed to solving the fractional 1%. Like we are very committed, and I've been really clear that that responsibility is my number one priority, and there is a lot of work for us to do. I acknowledge that, but I also know that we have tremendous tools at our fingertips that we can continue to invest in to do a better job. And so yes, while there may be something that slips through or some issue, we're really working hard to address this, and I think we have some good tools to do so.
What if YouTube wasn't open? What if I couldn't upload a video that I wanted to without asking you for permission? What would that do to YouTube? What if you had some sort of barrier to entry that required me to get some kind of permission to upload something before it went up there?
I think we would lose a lot of voices. I don't think that's the right answer, because we would lose a lot of voices and a lot of people who share content. Sometimes we hear from creators that they started sharing content, like they started doing, I don't know, like you look at Saul Khan, right? He got started almost by accident, right? Who now creates very valuable educational content. But what I think is the right answer that you're alluding to, but not quite. I'm going to improve a little bit your suggestion here, which is having more trusted tiers. In a sense, we've already started doing that with monetization, saying, look, you can't just come onto the platform and have monetization on day one. You have to have a certain number of views, you have to have a certain number of hours, you have to be in good standing. And so that's an example of where we have more of a trusted relationship with them. So we think, we do the similar thing with like live streams in terms of certain number of views that you have to have, subscribers that you need to have. So I think this idea of like, not everything is automatically given to you on day one, that it's more of a we have trusted tiers.
But there's still at bottom, you can put stuff on YouTube without asking
everyone
for it.
can start. Everyone can start. Everyone can be their own media provider. But in order to get some of the broader distribution or to have monetization, it's something that you work your way up
Is
to.
this insistence that the platform has to be open? I can think of a business reason for that. I can think of legal reasons for that, right? Section 230 gives you legal protections, but you have to not actually prevent someone from uploading something. And I can think of ideological reasons why you want the platform to be open. Which one is most important to you?
Sorry, I'm trying to remember them all. You said business reasons?
Legal, ideology, but you can add I get that more voices is better, but if having unlimited voices has a problem that is always going to
it's a core issue. If you want to limit it and say, hey, we're only going to have like a select set of people, but what are the factors that you're determining that? How are you deciding who is getting to be on the platform and have speech and who's not?
But you are deciding fundamentally, right? You have teams and you have software and you weigh in. You are fundamentally making a decision at some point.
We do, but that's after they've been on the platform and we have an understanding of what they're doing. It's based on the content that people have uploaded. So I think, look, we see all these benefits of openness, but we also see that needs to be married with responsibility, and you do need to have more of this responsibility in place, and you need the different ways to understand what is the content that you should be putting in recommendations, what is the content that should be promoted for different use cases, and YouTube deals with a lot of different cases. So we deal with entertainment, music. Like, why should we say some people can, new musicians or old musicians, like why would we want to close something like that?
Now that we have discussed Susan's leadership from the perspective of the 5 Fs, let's dive a little bit more into mechanisms and outcomes. As Hiller outlines, leadership mechanisms help us understand why leadership has the effect that it does, and these mechanisms emerge through contextual interaction. According to OC, mechanisms act as the mediating links between context, leadership behavior, and outcome. Context can be omnibus, which deals with the broad environmental influences like where, who, and when, or they can be discrete, which focuses on specific variables such as tasks, social, physical, or temporal environments that influence behavior directly or that moderate relationships between dimensions. So when we talk about Susan, let's focus on an omnibus and a discrete context factor, starting with the omnibus factor of who. The who omnibus factor focuses on who are the people that you're leading. For example, what is the sex composition, or what is the demographic differences in the organization? When Susan first joined Google as employee number 16, she was the first woman to join the company. She was also pregnant, so she was the first person to take maternity leave. As such, she helped shape how issues impacting women in the workplace were seen at Google, at YouTube, at the tech industry, and the world as a whole. Understanding that the teams at Google were largely male, Susan used her voice and leadership to be inclusive. She engaged in inclusive leadership behaviors that were effective at driving tangible results that made Google more inclusive. Over the years, she wrote many op-eds where she shared her perspective and her personal journey. This included writing about how paid maternity leave is good for business, how to break up the Silicon Valley Boys Club, responding to the controversial Google anti-diversity memo, explaining how free speech and corporate responsibility can coexist online, and advocating for working parents. Inclusive behaviors like this and other actions from her led to effective, tangible outcomes as outlined by Hiller, like increasing the share of women working at YouTube from 24% when she started as CEO in 2014 to 37% in 2025. These are tangible results that were a direct result of her actions. Turning to the discrete context, let's talk about social mechanisms. When we think about that, that really focuses on team and organizational climate and culture. Susan was known for being a quiet but decisive leader. She was infamous for listening to her team and not being defensive. This led to an attitudinal outcomes that Hiller describes, like fostering an environment of psychological safety, trust, and collaboration. The people that Susan led were able to be open and honest about the state of things, so the team was able to tackle problems based in reality, which really enabled innovation and loyalty. We see this in many of the tributes to her after she passed. But perhaps one of the greatest examples of this is the fact that 8 years after I met her in the back of the room at the Creator Summit, I am still so inspired by her life and career that I chose to spend 5 weeks on a project dedicated to understanding her, her leadership, and her impact on the world. Overall, when I think about Susan's leadership, she had such a positive impact. She set up the backbone of what has made Google a $3 trillion company. She grew YouTube to over 2.7 billion monthly active users across 80 languages and 100 countries, making it the second most visited website in the world, only second to Google. She inspired countless women and girls to pursue careers in tech. She increased the representation of women in the organization. She created psychological safety within her organization. She grew YouTube into a business that generated $54 billion in 2024 and has 1 billion viewing hours every day. She increased the scope of the platform from just entertainment to also include gaming, family, news, kids, and education. And she helped usher in a new form of media where creators have become media companies and have been paid over $30 billion from YouTube. When I think about Susan, she wasn't just a trailblazer in the industry. She was also a daughter, a sister, and a mom to 5 children. So I really want to end this project with words from her family talking about who she was as a leader and as a mom.
Tell us what kind of leader Susan was and how you witnessed her in action, because it strikes me she cared deeply, deeply about the people who worked for her.
I think she definitely cared deeply about the people that worked for her. You know, I think the thing that I learned from Susan, she was very clear and decisive. I think she was very fair. She really liked structure. You know, I think that was one of the things that when you speak to a lot of the artists and the creators, they appreciated the structure that Susan brought to it, that Susan created a platform that really ran based on systems and rules. And I think that within the company, I think people felt like she was very fair, that she listened to people and she was decisive. You know, I think she was really an extraordinary leader. and I think also she was very warm, like she was very empathetic and could relate when people, for a lot of new moms, for a lot of people who had family issues. I think she cared. And I think it was kind of that combination of being very clear, very directive, and caring about people that made so many people, I think, really appreciate her and feel like that she really impacted their careers and helped them grow. I think number two, if you read Susan's blog post, she talks about the appreciation of every day.
In fact, can I read that, Anne? I have it in front of me. She wrote, "Having cancer hasn't been easy. As a person, I've changed a lot, and probably the most important lesson I've learned is just to focus and enjoy the present. Life is unpredictable for everyone, with many unknowns, but there is a lot of beauty in everyday life. My goals going forward are to enjoy the present as much as possible and fight for better understanding and cures for this disease."
So exactly. And I think that we also are, like, we're a family of high achievers who, we do a lot, we push a lot, we're pushing boundaries, we're associated in, again, in an intense world. And I think that there's that push as well to have a moment sometimes to reflect, to slow it down, to appreciate your family, to appreciate the friends, take the time off. And I always worry when I meet people who have, a lifetime of wishes, like, oh, I wish I could go on this vacation, or I could do this, or I want to read these books, but they never find the time to do it. And I think that Susan actually always, I think, had a pretty balanced life. She always was remarkably good at work-life balance, of coming home for their kids. She always used to emphasize that to me, things like, don't do dinner meetings because, like, it takes away from your kids. It's not a good use of time. So she was always work-life balance. But I think, she was surprised. She was surprised that she was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And I think that there was a lot of things still on her bucket list. And I think it's worth it for everybody to, wake up and look outside and appreciate. Like, it's amazing to be alive. It's amazing to look around the world and the opportunities that we have, and to appreciate the small details every day. And I think Susan kind of had that mentality of, let's try to appreciate, let's have that moment of appreciation every day, even though it has really been an incredibly difficult time.
She wrote those words, but I do think that she had been living that. At her memorial, her 9-year-old said, my mom was, a mom of 5 with a CEO side gig. Right. That's how her kids, right, saw her, that the YouTube CEO was kind of like the side activity.
Her side hustle.
Exactly. The extracurricular, right?